Welcome back to Life Sciences. We're looking at the cell today. Before the break, we saw that the cell is compartmentalized into different organelles. Well, we're going to have a look at a generalized plant cell and a generalized animal cell. Not any specific kind of cell, just a general animal cell first of all to begin with, and we're going to see what are all those organelles and what are the functions that they actually have to do, and why are they kept inside these different membranes and compartments. Well, if we start, we're going to look at the cell membrane. The cell membrane goes all the way around the outside of the cell, and it holds the cell together and keeps it separate from any other cells or any liquid that might be around the cell. Of course, the cell is filled with cytoplasm, which is a jelly-like structure which allows the organelles to be able to move around fairly flexibly and allows things to diffuse into the cell and out of the cell. A very important organelle that we'll find both in plant cells and in animal cells is the mitochondrion. The mitochondrion is the organelle that is responsible for taking glucose and breaking it down to release a substance called ATP. And ATP is what is the energy for your cell, what becomes the energy for your cell to move, to replicate, to make proteins. Anything that requires energy comes from the mitochondrion. Centrioles are also present, but only in certain cells, and they're responsible for cell division and for a very specific aspect of cell division, which we'll come to in a later lesson. We come to two different kinds of organelles which are named pretty similarly: rough endoplasmic reticulum and smooth endoplasmic reticulum. If we look here at the smooth endoplasmic reticulum and rough endoplasmic reticulum, we see that the difference is that rough endoplasmic reticulum has a whole lot of ribosomes associated with it. Now, ribosomes make proteins, and endoplasmic reticulum stores protein. So it makes sense that these two organelles are very often found associated with each other. If the endoplasmic reticulum does not have ribosomes associated with it, we say that it is smooth. It simply means that when we look at it under a microscope, it doesn't have a rough granular appearance that it does have if it's got ribosomes attached to it. This part of the cell is the very important part called the nucleus. It's the largest organelle in the cell. It's the most important organelle in the cell, and I'm not going to spend too much more time discussing it because we're going to get back to that later in the lesson today, and we're going to look at the structure of the nucleus in great detail. Lysosomes are small structures that carry very important substances that can break down parts of the cell. Now, it's very important that those lysosomes are compartmentalizing or keeping apart from the rest of the cell the substances that are inside it, because inside lysosomes we find substances that can break down the cell. So when a cell becomes old, or when some of the ribosomes become old, lysosomes will eat them up and make sure that they do not become problem for the cell, do not become toxic to the cell, get them out of the way. Sometimes the lysosomes break them down so that they can be recycled and reused. The Golgi apparatus is found both in plant and in animal cells, and it is going to take proteins that the ribosomes make, and it's going to change them in some way, modify them, it'll store them for a while. And you'll notice that the Golgi apparatus is the only word here on our list of organelles that has a capital letter. And that's important because it was named after the person who discovered it. And that's why we need to write it with a capital letter. All the other labels are common nouns and they're not written with capital letters. In an animal cell, the vacuoles are rather small. They are tiny little droplets of possibly oil or other substances that the cell needs to store. When we have a look at the plant cell, we'll see that the vacuole is much, much larger. Microtubules are present mainly in animal cells, although they are in plant cells as well. But in animal cells, they perform the very important function of moving the cell. Certain animal cells need to be able to move, they need to be flexible, and the microtubules actually help pull the cell into different forms, into different shapes, and they keep the structure of the cell. If we have a look at the plant cell, we'll see that lots of the things are in common. There we have endoplasmic reticulum, we have a nucleus, ribosome, and cytoplasm, mitochondrion, Golgi apparatus, lysosome. All of those things are identical to in an animal cell. What we have that is special with a plant cell is, of course, the cell wall that keeps the plant rigid, the plant cell rigid, and that helps to keep the plant as a whole nice and rigid. And so does the vacuole. Here, the vacuole is going to be filled with water to keep the plant cell rigid. And of course, you're going to find a chloroplast or a number of chloroplasts in the cell that are going to make food for the plant cell. After the break, we're going to focus on the nucleus and look at the role that the nucleus plays in the functioning of both plant and animal cells.